Tomorrow's World was a television program that predicted the future and invited inventors, engineers, and experts to showcase the latest technology that might have an impact on our lives. The British public was introduced to the home computer and the smartphone through this show, which ran from 1965 to 2003. When I started researching this video, I joked that I could recreate a mock-up Tomorrow's World segment talking about AI, but it turns out I didn't have to.
It's taken me hours to get this far on my CV. So when I finish this masterpiece, I'd quite like to think it'd be looked at by an expert. You know, someone who'd spot that spark of genius between the lines. So I'm not too sure about it being read and analysed by a machine.
But this machine can take paper CVs, scan and understand them in seconds, select interviewees and even send out rejection letters without a human being involved at all.
Now here in the UK, 15 companies have installed the recruiting computer.
The designers say it saves time and can pick out a shortlist as well as any professional. Some are worried about the potential for unfair bias.
It does make it a lot easier, I think, to discriminate. You can just say the machine shows that it's all fair, everyone had a fair go, where in fact you could program into it whatever you wanted.
So, what do the system's designers say to that?
The system itself is totally non-discriminatory.
If it can be used for positive discrimination, surely information can be put in for negative discrimination.
Right.
Their new online recruiting tool did not like women.
Replaced humans.
Male candidates were preferable.
Don't worry about being replaced.
What is AI? AI seems to be everywhere right now, from ChatGPT to Midjourney. We're hearing it being used by everyone from students to lawyers, but what exactly is it? Broadly speaking, artificial intelligence is anything that allows computers to perform tasks that previously required human intelligence. One subset of AI is machine learning. So most computers, analog and digital, are never going to get better at executing their various functions. A calculator is not going to get better at maths the longer that you have it. From day one, it's already achieved its full calculator potential. If you want to improve its functions, then you'd have to fundamentally alter it in some way. The same goes for your laptop or your phone. But machine learning is what most people now think of when they hear the term AI. It basically allows a program to improve over time as it's exposed to and trained to interpret more and more data. Let's say you wanted to create a program that is really good at identifying images of bicycles. You'd create your program and start exposing it to images. At first, it's going to be pretty bad at identifying bicycles, but you can train it. Like maybe you outsource your training using CAPTCHA and make millions of people trying to log into their Gmail account click pictures containing bicycles. This gives that software new data about what is and what isn't a bike. And after a while, the software will become really good at knowing what a bike is. Not only that, but after it's been exposed to enough data, the software might be able to generate images of bikes, create original designs for bicycles. And that is called deep learning, a subset within machine learning itself. This includes unsupervised learning, meaning an AI can analyze large amounts of data more deeply and reveal new insights for which it might not have been trained. For example, consider a deep learning model that is trained to analyze consumer purchases. The model has data only for the items you have already purchased. However, the artificial neural network can suggest new items that you haven't bought by comparing your buying patterns to those of other similar customers. That particular quote comes from Amazon's FAQ page. I kid you not. I guess at least the site using your data to sell you more things more efficiently is pretty good at explaining how it does it. When I started researching this video, I knew pretty quickly that I wanted to focus in on how AI was affecting people's jobs as well as the world of work in general. The most obvious question being, what jobs can AI actually do? The artist. First, let's look at creative jobs. This new wave of AI is generative, after all, producing writing and artwork at the click of a button. A lot of the conversation around AI currently revolves around AI and art, but a lot of the time, this has been around stolen art. Like we talked about earlier, AI relies on machine learning. Machine learning relies on a whole lot of data, so any art-related AI needs a massive art database to train on, and a lot of that art is scraped from the internet without compensation or even acknowledgement. For example, Getty Images is suing Stability AI for using its massive image archive as data for machine learning. Considering that Stability keeps generating images with the Getty Images watermark logo, I think they have a pretty solid case. And then there's Pseudo-Write, which appears to have knowledge of the Omegaverse, which strongly implies that it scraped a significant amount of data from the fanfiction website AO3. Basically, AI needs human-created stuff to learn to make its own stuff. But artists aren't just concerned about AI using their work, they're worried about AI replacing their work. AI is actually one of the issues behind the US writers' strike, which as of this recording is still ongoing.
Hi, I'm Francesca Ramsey. I'm an actress, TV writer, and producer, and member of the Writers Guild of America, but folks online might remember me as the host and exec producer of MTV's Decoded.
It quickly became apparent that for this video, I was going to have to talk to a bunch of people in different industries to see how AI was impacting them.
When it comes to the potential of AI being used in TV writing, the thing that I'm most worried about is the studio potentially using AI to cut us out of the writing process and thus pay us less. So there is a world in which the studios could use AI to create a first draft either off of existing IP or interpreting another script that's already written, or just with different metrics that have been plugged in, and then it could pop out a first draft and a writer would then be tasked with rewriting it.
Rewriting typically requires a much smaller writing team than creating an original script, so by using AI to create an initial draft, the amount of viable writing jobs dramatically decreases. The WGA brought up concerns about AI with studios, and to the shock of nobody, they refused to even address AI as a potential issue.
So the Writers Guild of America has a contract with the AMPTP, which is the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, and that covers about 350 different production companies and networks, including streaming networks. Unfortunately, they refuse to engage at all on any of the topics surrounding AI. So we asked about making sure that AI could not be used to write scripts, could not be trained using our intellectual property, and could not be folded into the minimum basic agreements, meaning that you need to follow the agreements that we have for writers getting paid per draft and per week, and that AI cannot be used to get around those standards.
This isn't some paranoid addition to negotiations. AI is already affecting artists getting jobs or even replacing them altogether, which I learned about in more detail when I interviewed Eddie, who had his own negative experiences with the use of AI in his work.
I met someone who just wanted me to record as a character in his animated show, and that's fine. We've known each other for a long time in online spaces, and I was happy to do so. There was no money involved. It was just, yeah, sure, I'm happy to do a voice. And then the character would recur. He would come back, not every week, every month, it'd be every other one kind of thing. It was never an inconvenience. Then out the blue, he sent me a message saying, I'm experimenting using AI voices. And how would I feel about allowing my voice to be manipulated into an AI voice? I was like, to be honest, not really. I don't feel very comfortable with that. I've had experiences where people have taken advantage of my voice, and so I don't want to do that again. So no, thank you.
I mean, this seems like a really very reasonable request, especially considering it was an unpaid gig, but the creator of this animated show didn't react well.
He got very offended, saying, I can't believe you would think that I would abuse your voice like that. In the end, he decided, since you won't let me use your voice, I'm going to have an AI generate a different voice for your character instead. So I got fired for a character I never got paid to do anyway. And my choice was either it had to be an AI of my own voice or an AI of someone else's.
It doesn't feel like the increasing use of AI in business is about money, at least not strictly. After all, the WGA strikes, partly fueled by AI concerns, is costing the studios way more money than it would to meet their pay demands. AI isn't always just about money. It's sometimes about control.
It's been used in a more insidious, opportunistic way, where people will take people's voices and fake endorsements. I've had a YouTube channel with their own animated series, and then they took my voice without my permission using this UberDuck site and fake an endorsement from me. They would make their own video essay with me, with my voice, and talking about this animated show that I have never heard of. And just pretend that this is actually me.
And AI isn't the first time that corporations have exploited an actor's voice or image to endorse a product. Lindsay Ellis made a really great video about Robin Williams' experiences with the Walt Disney Corporation during the marketing of Aladdin. Williams, mindful of the ethics of advertising to children, was very strict about his voice not being used for endorsements. And Eddie actually brought up this very example to me while we were talking unprompted.
He saw what was on the fucking horizon. And the fact that he had like contractually claused that no one can use his image, his likeness, his voice in anything was so ahead of the time. What was to stop Disney just putting Robin Williams in that live action Disney movie with his voice and his CGI face on top. Like, yeah, I think we're going to see a lot of actors starting to protect their identities if they haven't already.
So this is an example of AI amplifying existing issues. Technology very rarely creates new problems, but it can make old ones worse. Beyond the horror of AI taking away the power of the artist, there's also a negative impact on the art itself. Art essentially is a form of communication between creator and audience. When we remove the creator, that changes how the audience is going to react to the art.
I can't help but feel like, particularly with voice acting, it's probably going to be a matter of time before we're going to see a lot more AI voices taking the place of voice actors, and it will lack soul, I think.
This is a common critique of AI art. It's soulless. But what does that actually mean? And if AI art is inherently soulless, does that mean it's bad? Because a lot of people enjoy AI art. They pay their £2.99 for some Lensa AI portraits, and it makes them laugh. It provokes an emotional reaction. And isn't that what art is supposed to do? I'm not sure if can AI make good art is the most important question here, because it's going to be inherently subjective. I feel like the real questions are things like, will the unregulated use of AI prevent good art from being made? And does a society that devalues artists financially and legally prevent good art from being made? One of Francesca's largest concerns about AI is how, if unregulated, it could prevent basically anyone who isn't a Nepo baby or already wealthy from becoming a writer.
Oftentimes, marginalized folks do not have family connections in the business already, or don't just have the wealth to stay in the industry and sustain themselves between jobs, which are some of the issues that we're fighting for in our contract with the studio. If AI is able to write first drafts of scripts, it's going to require a higher level writer to do a polish or a rewrite on those drafts. And so once again, newer writers are not probably going to be getting those opportunities because they won't have the skills needed to do that kind of rewriting. And those are things that you learn in the writer's room. And once again, I'm worried that AI will shorten the length of writers' rooms, again, because it will be able to crank out first drafts in no time, and will also potentially make the writing staff smaller. And again, the people who will then be most impacted by that are newer writers. And again, that ends up oftentimes being marginalized folks that need those opportunities to get their foot in the door.
So AI has the potential to prevent artists from building their careers, destroying art before it's even made. Writing, painting, playing music, drawing, art is something that human beings do to relax, to express themselves, to bring joy and catharsis to themselves and others. The fact so many people are working so hard to ensure that machines that feel none of these things can replace humans in that process feels instinctively soulless to me. So yeah, AI and creativity is a sticky subject, but what about more analytical jobs? The journalist. We saw at the start of the videos some of the recent instances of newsrooms being downsized, even cut altogether, as the role of journalists comes up against developments in AI.
The word journalism is so far-reaching, right? You've got your really high-end Pulitzer Prize winning investigative stuff, but you've also got your listicles, top 10 moments of breakfast TV in 2023, that kind of thing that happens, those roundups and things like that.
That's Shivani Dave, a journalist, broadcaster and physicist, talking about the wide spectrum of what we might consider journalism. We've seen a kind of, well, about time response by some to the news of BuzzFeed News closing down, based on this idea that the site wasn't real journalism, presumably mistaking it for the light-hearted BuzzFeed content that focused more on like quizzes. And indeed, alongside closing BuzzFeed News, founder Jonah Peretti said there would be substantial job cuts across the rest of the business, totaling about 180 redundancies, representing about 15% of the company's workforce. But BuzzFeed News itself was a genuine news outlet. It won the George Polk Award, the Sydney Award, the National Magazine Award, the National Press Foundation Award, and the Pulitzer Prize for International Reporting, and was a member of the White House Press Corps. So what does the destabilization of newsrooms mean when it comes to AI? The first thing to know is that AI has already been used in journalism for years now. According to author of Newsmakers, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Journalism, AI innovation in the past decade has come in 3 waves: automation, augmentation, and generation. During the automation phase, the focus was on automating data-driven news stories, such as financial reports, sports results, and economic indicators, using natural language generation techniques. Essentially, the idea here was to free up journalists' time by taking away more mundane or repetitive tasks that didn't need complex human analysis or judgment. Then, the emphasis shifted to augmenting reporting through machine learning and natural language processing to analyse large datasets and uncover trends. This helped inform the reporting itself as well as what was reported to begin with, using data to support journalists' work. As reporter Barbara Gruber explains, tools like Heliograph, News Tracer, or CrowdTangle are now alerting journalists to breaking news, viral stories, and anomalous data trends. Editors can then determine if there's a bigger story to be written by a human being. But then we get to where we are now, the use of generative AI using large language models to generate narrative text at scale. While the first two waves were very much supplementary, this third iteration is potentially utterly transformative for journalism. You can ask a chatbot to write an entire article, even specifying a particular viewpoint or publication style. In this way, we can see how AI could be a major part of all areas of publication. It could be used in the research phase to transcribe interviews of sources, summarize documents, or track trending topics. Then it could be used in the article writing stage itself, with generative AI capable of generating entire articles from scratch in seconds. And finally, it could be used to distribute these pieces, including automated tagging systems, scheduling, and creating social cuts of content. This kind of whole process AI journalism is already here. In a report last month, the news credibility rating company NewsGuard found 49 news sites across 7 languages that appeared to be mostly or entirely AI generated. These sites were publishing hundreds of articles each day, often using profiles for authors that in reality don't exist, and sometimes posting stories that didn't exist in reality either. Ironically, one of the top results when searching for reporting about AI in journalism is from the Washington Post, which itself became known for its use of AI to cover the 2016 Rio Olympics and congressional election results. So the tools are already being used, but they also have their limits. Just last month, 2 French journalists, Jean Rognetta and Maurice de Rambateau, specializing in the potential and limits of AI in journalism, wrote about their experiment pushing the program to the limits, ending in a 250-page report written by AI detailing the main trends of the CES technology show in Las Vegas. According to one report on the results, the AI struggled to identify the main trends at CES and could not produce a summary worthy of a journalist. It also pilfered wholesale from Wikipedia. The authors found that they needed to intervene constantly to keep the process on track, so while the programs helped save some time, they were not yet fit to replace real journalists. Because that's the question seeping into the industry. Are journalists' jobs at risk? With the announcement of BuzzFeed News' closure came a memo from Vanda Peretti that openly stated, "We will bring more innovation in the form of creators, AI, and cultural moments," seemingly confirming that AI was at least in part to blame for the decision. At the heart of this is the question of what journalism should be, and the ways our modern world of free content, ad-based funding, fast-paced news cycles, and extreme algorithms have impacted it. This isn't just AI coming from nowhere to take a wrecking ball to an industry. It's one element of a long process of change that the industry has been going through during the age of the internet that prioritizes eyeballs no matter the ethical cost, because views correlate to ad money, which is what funds most of the news on the internet. For many looking at the future of the industry, they're asking, are there elements of journalism that can't be done by AI? Typically, these conversations center around deep, original reporting, but Shivani also sees a gap in the more fluffy zeitgeist-style articles too.
For some of those fun elements of journalism, some of those like lighter stories, there will be this encroachment of seeing whether or not AI can do that. But I think fundamentally, at least at the point where we are now with the technology, AI will never be able to understand and recreate that like human emotion, connection, whimsy, joy, that kind of like sense of a nation.
In its most optimistic spaces, the conversation around journalism and AI looks at the way it can elevate mental and psychological loads, asking if AI is an opportunity to look after workers, where a human being would typically be asked to shift through comments and manually assess and hide inappropriate contributors, including those that include slurs, threats, and personal harassment of the writers. AI could be used to do this instead. But this potential does seem entirely down to those at the top of each organisation. When asked about the subject, Lisa Gibbs, Director of News Partnerships and AI News Lead at AP, said, "It frees our journalists from routine tasks to do higher level work that uses their creativity, allows us to create more content that serves new audiences more efficiently, and improves our ability to discover news. and each news organization must have an ethical framework for how to use it and understand its implications. That reliance on companies to pick and choose their own ethical framework is a symptom of technology that moves so much faster than legislation and moral consensus. Ethical issues already in existence in journalism won't suddenly disappear with the emergence of AI. In fact, they might be exacerbated by it. I already mentioned the impact of funding sources on the industry. How do we weigh up profit-driven quantity models with the skills-based humanitarian reporting style of journalism that is more expensive to produce?
AI needs to be able to weigh up the priorities, and I'm not sure that it can yet in a way that also understands human experience and the timescales and like skills and expertise. I worry that what's happening at the moment is there is less and less investment in investigative journalism. I think there's like a larger conversation that we could have about the way journalism is funded and like journalists are paid and things like that, but AI could really have the potential to make that situation a whole lot worse.
And then we have the issue of fake news. We've already seen how AI has an issue with fact-checking sourcing and accuracy, so it shouldn't be a surprise that this is a concern. If AI is scraping other news sources for information, this can absolutely become a vicious cycle of fabricated information by AI spiraling around those generated stories. The need to constantly fight for the top spots on Google search results, to get more viewers, to pay for more ads, to make more money, hurts the quality of content, but is especially an issue when paired with AI as a tool. An anonymous former employee at a website that publishes reviews, news and analysis on technology and electronics went on record earlier this year to reveal they use AI to rewrite the intros every 2 weeks or so because Google likes updated content. Eventually it gets so mangled that about every 4 months a real editor has to look at it and rewrite it. The existence of so-called content mills or content farms, sites that outsource their writing to freelancers for minimal pay and high-speed, good enough articles in return, is another symptom of the financial model of modern journalism, where AI is taking over. Reporter Will Aramus summarised the dystopian end result in his article on AI journalism. The wide availability of tools like ChatGPT means more people are producing similarly cheap content, and they're all competing for the same slots in Google search results or Amazon's on-site product reviews. So they all have to crank out more and more article pages, each tuned to rank highly for specific search queries, in hopes that a fraction will break through. The result is a deluge of AI-written websites, many of which are never seen by human eyes. Part of the problem is the lack of transparency around the use of this technology. For the most part, we don't know who is using it or how they're using it within newsrooms. We're already seeing reports of newsrooms giving AI-generated reporters human names and avatars to pass them off as human journalists. This obscuring of reality means it may be difficult to ascertain a chain of responsibility for poor reporting, misinformation, and bias produced in these articles. Because bias is a huge part of the potential AI problem within journalism, as well as every other industry that it's a part of. That idea from the start of the video of AI being used in the hiring process is a classic example. Amazon got in hot water a few years ago when it was discovered that women were being discriminated against in their hiring process because the data used to train the AI that was picking candidates was used on existing employees, most of whom were men, so the algorithm interpreted the ideal candidate as male and rejected applications that suggested otherwise. There was arguably an existing bias in their human hiring process, but the AI was looking for patterns and it ended up exacerbating the issue. I recently spoke to someone I know who works on police data who ran some analysis to understand what factors were correlated with a suspect being identified. This analysis hypothetically might help prioritize which crimes were worth putting resources into, as they were more likely to end in a perpetrator being identified or the crime being solved. Only when he fed it actual crime data, the learning model gave the output that crimes with female victims don't have suspects identified and crimes with male victims do. So if you were to use this in the real world, the logical conclusion would be to not investigate crimes with female victims, as it would be a waste of resources. He told me, "One of the things that stood out for me is if I had used a different algorithm that was less easily interpretable, I potentially wouldn't have known what decision it was making, so wouldn't have known that that was what was happening in the background." So not only is the inequality or bias present before AI is involved, but there is a risk that without human oversight, unknown biases could seep into AI decision-making that might affect an organization's output, policies, regulations, and projects going forwards, and leave major problems unsolved. So where might we see these issues in AI journalism. Let's start with what stories are even considered worthy of reporting. With companies using event detection systems that will identify breaking news and trending stories via social media, we see how that decision becomes skewed by who does and doesn't use the social media platforms being searched. Shivani was all too aware of how the financial model of journalism could lead to AI finding patterns around the type of negative content that gets views if programmed for look for the most clickable and therefore profitable stories or headlines.
If it's going to strip it all back and re-editorialize it in a way that either makes people angry or emotive, which is what sells newspapers at the moment, I think that could be really, really worrying, because when it's anger and emotion that is selling the newspapers, it's also a lot of fear, prejudice, bias. I just really believe that the system that we work under within journalism is not a sustainable system, and AI, I think at the moment from what I've seen, and I would gladly be proven wrong if somebody can show me that I am wrong. I just really think that the system of AI that we have at the moment will make the structure of the industry of journalism worse.
I don't think it's overly pessimistic to suggest that the existing lean of capitalistic journalism, either towards churning out negative outrage or fear-inducing stories to get eyeballs on banner ads, or heavily biased pieces that spread the political or social views of rich media owners, will not necessarily be made better by the use of AI, because we know that AI has the potential to soak up bias like a damn sponge, even from right at the start when we look at who is creating them in the first place. Homogeneous teams of developers will inevitably have gaps in their knowledge, perception, and experiences, but this is especially impactful with projects like developing AI, where we also have to think about the data that's being used to train it. A lack of cultural or experiential knowledge at the start can have a massive ripple effect. Before Reddit's decision last month to put its API behind a paywall, it was seen as an obvious choice for the training of large language models by many. Even now, the attitude seems to be a conversation around how companies will pay for the access, not whether the data being accessed is the right kind of tool. Journalist Chris Stoker-Walker has pointed out that in fact, Reddit's dataset was shown to have negative gender, religious, and ethnic biases in a 2021 study, and gender biases against women politicians in a 2022 research paper. We can see how the data input can hold biases when we look at what it's produced at the other end, with image-generating AI like Lensa criticised by users for sexualizing images of women by default, for example. To test the software, The Guardian uploaded images of 3 different famous feminists, Betty Friedan, Shirley Chisholm, and Amelia Earhart. The author of The Feminine Mystique became a nymph-like, full-chested young woman clad in piles of curls and a slip dress. Chisholm, the first black woman elected to US Congress, had a wasp waist, and the aviation pioneer was rendered naked, leaning on what appeared to be a bed. All of the photos submitted by The Guardian showed the icons at various stages of their lives. The majority of the AI-rendered photos we received back showed them quite young, with smooth skin and few wrinkles. So I think it's pretty clear that given analytical tasks, AI is currently lacking. It isn't just that it can replicate existing biases that might be present, but that its systems are in danger of exacerbating them without careful consideration of the possibility throughout the process of building, training, and using them. So, jury is still out on creativity and analysis, but what about straightforward logical tasks? The postal worker. There are lots of jobs that have tasks that are ultimately down to logic. In those situations, AI would simply be more efficient, right?
So prior to any automation or AI involved, we would manually send out invoices. If customer hasn't paid, we'll send them an email, maybe give them a call, try and collect the balance. If they didn't pay or didn't return any contact, we'd then manually block the account. Everything's sort of more of a manual process where it's all done by us. And so we have, I guess, a better record of what is happening to each account because we're having to do it. And that's basically what the job entailed.
This interviewee works for a postal service. Higher-ups decided to institute an AI program to automate certain parts of their job, ostensibly as a way to decrease costs and increase efficiency. But the AI automation made things a lot harder. Normally, if a customer missed a payment, postal employees would first email reminders to their customers about overdue fees, giving them another chance to explain and pay, and extending their access to their account. The AI systems started automatically blocking accounts that had missed a payment immediately.
We're now sort of pivoted towards just dealing with inquiries from the customer, which is usually, why is my account blocked? What's going on? And them getting angry. It's essentially because the bot/AI, it can get to accounts quicker. It just does a blanket, any account that's overdue, it'll just block. So when it was first introduced, I had about 800 accounts just blocked overnight. What they have advised is basically they want the bot as a tool to help us be more efficient. But in terms of helping us be more efficient, it's more so they want this particular role to be more efficient so they can kind of cut costs with labor and wages.
This indiscriminate blocking of accounts was obviously confusing for customers. To make things worse, a lot of them didn't realise that they were interacting with an AI at all. Remember the fact that newsrooms have reportedly been disguising AI as fictional journalists? Well, that decision to mask an AI and pass it off as a human worker was a policy here too, but this particular program digitally disguised itself not just as a fictional human employee, but a real human employee within the team.
Currently, as it stands, the bot, when it sends out emails, it actually sends it with our email signature. So I don't think a lot of the people realize that it is a bot sending out those emails. They think the emails that we write are very cold, which is understandable because it's just a generic email with plug in their account details. So it's never going to be tailored to them.
So how is the work he does directly with customers a different experience?
It feels like you can build some sort of rapport. You have a relationship with them rather than just feeling like it's very transactional. Whereas with the bot, everything just, it's very matter of the fact. Everything is declarative. It's just, this is what's happened. There's no empathy in it.
And this lack of empathy actually makes the process more inefficient, not less. Whoever decided to implement the AI looked at the task of managing late payments and thought that it could be easily automated. But there's actually a fair amount of nuance to that part of the job. Nuance that the AI was not set up to handle.
You can't differentiate why the customer hasn't paid. So I think that's a really important aspect in credit, because if you don't know why the customer hasn't paid, you can't stop it in the future from happening. You can't really resolve that. You need someone to look at it and see what sort of has caused the issue.
So clearly this system is inefficient for the customer. It's also extremely inefficient for postal workers. As a result of the automatic blocking, their inbox is backlogged with hundreds of emails from customers trying to reinstate their accounts or complaining about an AI-caused issue. The work is increased, not decreased.
The other people in my team said that they just don't have the time to assist. They were saying that they log in, they don't take their breaks, they didn't take lunch, and they said they would usually work overtime just to try and meet the new demand. So it's causing more work for my team, which is, I guess, counterintuitive for us, but they don't see that.
So it's not necessarily more efficient for the customer, not more efficient for the workers. At the very least, is this cost effective? Well, in some regards, no. The company's actively losing customers because the user experience is now so terrible.
Their business is halted. They can't send out their orders. I can't get to them in time. I'm getting about 100 emails a day that I just can't answer. So it starts backlogging. Customers are leaving our business and saying, I'm going to go with another provider because my account's been blocked for 2 weeks. I haven't been able to send out orders, which is fair enough.
I mean, I don't think that the corporate overlords wanted every part of the postal experience worse for employees and customers alike, but I also think it would have been a much more considered decision to instate this AI if they'd understood the actual value of their employees, the value of the work that they already do. Something that's really interesting to me is that neither the writers' union or the postal workers were apparently consulted about potential ways to work with AI. The WGA doesn't actually support a blanket ban on AI use in screenwriting and has offered studios a proposal for how AI could be incorporated into the screenwriting process in a way that benefits writers, protecting them from economic harm while allowing them to explore the uses of AI within their work on their own terms. So at this point, we've seen flaws in AI in terms of creative jobs, analytical jobs, logic-based jobs, customer-facing jobs, research jobs. So are people just overreacting when they worry about AI coming for their jobs? I've seen some people who are involved in the process behind AI suggest that there's nothing to worry about, that not much will change, and that although AI seems exciting and novel from the outside, it's just another tool, because they can see behind the curtain and know the issues that AI still has from a functionality point of view. They understand that this isn't a conscious, independently intelligent being, and so they dismiss, sometimes mock those that worry about their job security or predict grand, sweeping social changes from this new technology. But here's the thing, the more I've been researching this topic, the more that sounds like every expert in 2016 telling us that Trump could never be elected. Because it isn't about the technicalities or even the reality behind them. It's about people. And sometimes people are the worst. The AI developer.
I think there's been a lot of misconceptions from those people at the top as to what exactly it can do, which is interesting. Sitting here as someone who's worked in that space and has tried to build practical tools using these technologies, I think a big part of all of this stuff is it's never going to be equal to what a human can do. A human will always be able to read through something and recognize in ways that the computers won't be able to.
That was Gabe, an AI developer who spoke to me earlier this month. We talked about the limits of artificial intelligence that he jokingly referred to as artificial stupidity, but I also wanted to ask someone within the industry about my feelings that the limits of AI won't actually make much of a difference if those in power decide that it's good enough for their purposes. He suggested that right now, a lot of them don't seem to be ready to acknowledge the limitations at all. But even if they did, I'm not convinced that much would change, because it's all well and good telling them, this is just a language prediction model, it's not really intelligent. Because if the average person, especially the average person in business leadership, making decisions about the human workforce, thinks it does a good enough job, then they might not care about the flaws if it saves them money or increases profit. I mean, one of the world's leading AI data scientists, Geoffrey Hinton, recently quit his job so he could talk about the dangers of AI without considering how this impacts Google, and confessed that a part of him now regrets his life's work due to his growing concerns. AI ethics and progress and safeguarding are so clearly wrapped up with the power of huge business owners and CEOs, and that doesn't seem great to me. So during our interview, I checked in on a bunch of things that I'd seen reported on when it comes to AI, and he confirmed a lot of what I've already talked about in this video, giving some more detail. Take the data I was worried about being flawed or biased, for example. He broke it down further.
There are sort of two main types of training that can happen. There's supervised training, which is to say that you have people who create training sets and code them to feed into the machines, which tends to be very expensive. And then there's unsupervised, where you just throw in everything you can find and let the machine sort it out itself. Using ChatGPT, they started with unsupervised by essentially scraping the internet. As of, I think it was September 21st, 2021 was their cutoff date. So anything that's happened on the internet since that date, it will say, I don't know, that's when my training ended. And then they hired a large number of people in low-wage countries to essentially, when the machine started spitting out gibberish, tell the machine that that was what it was doing, and to help identify what the good results were from bad results. And that data set, there are any number of stories, of horror stories really, of what happens when you just do unsupervised training. You're going to get all of the biases that exist in our society and exist in the training data you put in. And one of the things that these systems do is they tend to find local maxima. So a lot of times they will actually accentuate those biases because they'll find small things and magnify them.
So we have a process that, it turns out, has a massive environmental impact, utilizes underpaid workers in developing nations, and may well indeed be magnifying biases. Like even the fact it's scraping some of these particular places on the internet, it will most likely be focusing on predominantly Western English-speaking sources, and that itself will have an effect on what is produced. And that's not even getting into data laundering and alleged stealing of artists' and writers' work to train various AI that have been cropping up in the last few weeks and months alone. Gabe also wanted to mention something else.
Key limitation, particularly for GPT-4 and ChatGPT, is around context and truth. The model is looking for words in order that it's seen words before, and words near words that it's seen words before. You can change the meaning of a sentence very easily by putting the word not into there. And GPT-4 isn't going to have that context to be able to do that. They lack context, and they lack that ability to actually understand what they're generating.
We as humans like to anthropomorphize things. We gasp in horror when someone kicks a robot dog. We say thank you to our Alexas. And so it feels like second nature to see what seems to be an independent intelligence carrying out a task and think of it as alive in some way. It's difficult to remember that it doesn't have critical thought. It doesn't understand in the way that we do. One of the most interesting points Gabe mentioned during our discussion was the way AI might shape the future of software development as a job itself.
Does remove the jobs of low-level software developers. How you move from being junior to being senior is by doing all of this grunt work. And these systems are taking advantage of the community that was created to help people learn, to help people grow, and using that to automate away that path up. I think the people who are using those don't care, because again, it's about how can I cut my development budget by 30% by cutting out all the junior devs. You end up with a lot less flexibility, because even a junior dev can have a really good idea that someone who's more senior can say, oh, well, if we did it like that. And the machine's never going to come up with that. I do suspect that in 20 or 30 years, it's going to be a real problem of a lack of people who are able to get the basic. It's the entry-level job, 10 years experience required. I can get it to work, but when something goes wrong, I have no idea how to fix it.
The lack of people in positions of power knowing how AI works, what its limitations are, surely can only be exacerbated if those working on it from the ground up lack the totality of that knowledge too, and it's starting way before we enter the workforce. The teacher. Ever since the latest iteration of ChatGPT launched, there have been wide reports of students using it for homework, particularly essay writing. And so I sat down with a high school teacher to hear about how AI has changed their classroom experience. Pretty quickly, it became clear that the reason AI is spreading like wildfire amongst students isn't just because of academic laziness.
The teaching landscape and the overall mood of students has drastically shifted, especially during the pandemic. Students who had not struggled before struggled a lot harder because of lockdown and different forms of learning. It's not that they don't care about the future. A lot of them just don't think they have one. It's really impacting learning and their entire outlook. Like, do I even need this? The world's burning away. Especially the smarter students who know what the political landscape is right now. Climate change, the pandemic isn't over, all of that. There is a hopelessness there that really feeds into the lack of motivation. And I've spoken to colleagues about this, and we just don't know how to fix it. Because it's not like you can just tell them it's all going to be all right. They're too smart to just believe that.
The US Surgeon General has said that the youth mental health crisis is the defining public health crisis of our time. And that is in 2023, after the start of the pandemic. And yeah, the data is really worrying. The most recent results for the Center of Disease Control and Prevention's Youth Risk Behavior Survey show an increase in self-reported mental health challenges, most notably amongst girls and those who identify as LGBTQ+. In 2021, for example, 42% of high school students said they experienced persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness during the past year. This was a 13.5% increase from 2019 and a 50% increase from 2011. The teacher I spoke to sees this in the classroom constantly. Behaviour management has always been a part of teachers' jobs, but their day-to-day experience seemed almost more in line with what a therapist would be doing, not an educator.
In recent years, the mental health issues of our students have statistically risen to a point where it is genuinely scary. The youngest kids I teach are 12 years old, and in my 7th grade, so a 12-year-old, it was so scary, like an anxiety attack in the middle of class. It's to a point where it's horrible. And after that class, I just went into this teacher's lounge and cried.
In short, the kids are not all right. They're struggling with their mental health, and they most likely aren't able to get the support they need to process it. Enter ChatGPT, an AI that offers to make just one bit of their life a little bit easier. Of course they're going to use it. And ironically, AI itself might be contributing to students' mental health struggles, which then leads them to use AI to cheat in this vicious cycle.
I think especially students who used to be really interested in English, because they wanted to do something with that in the future, whether it was like, oh, I want to study this at university, or I want to become a writer or a translator. But now with AI, that also just feels like it might be impossible or harder in the future. Like, even if I'm interested in it, I can't do anything with it.
For students, AI as it currently exists, with the lack of understanding of its limitations, the uncertainty of the job market, and the ease of access and use, is both the problem and the solution. Obviously, this kind of academic engagement with AI is harmful to education. For one, AI is notoriously inaccurate. ChatGPT is not fact-checked, it frequently generates misinformation, and students using it are not learning to build skills of analysis, understanding, and original idea generation and interrogation.
What's getting lost is the ability to, first of all, read longer texts and then read them with a lot more nuance and reading between the lines, especially with historical sources. Analyzing the biases behind political speech, for example, that's where it gets really tricky, because they can tell me, okay, yeah, AI says it's biased, but they don't understand themselves why. I think the problem would be the gap between having the students voice their own opinions and actually having the skill set to do that in a nuanced way. Because if they rely too much on AI to do all of their writing, they can't hone their own writing skills. And then there's kind of the missing chunk of the actual skill set, which, I am a bit worried about.
AI is developing faster and faster. Teachers and educators are stretched extremely thin. They've barely enough resources to handle a non-AI, non-post-pandemic year, let alone this new technology without any guidance or support. So what does this all add up to? Well, a whole lot of questions. The future of work and the incoming workforce doesn't seem entirely certain. It's littered with concerns about regulations, support, and training, even when industries are committed to using it only as a tool and not to replace workers. But surely I can answer one final question. Could AI do my job? I don't know. You tell me. Oh, it's taken me minutes to get this far in writing my video essay script. So now that ChatGPT has finished its masterpiece, I quite like to think it'll be looked at by thousands of viewers. You know, the people who wouldn't spot the spark, that AI between the lines. But this machine can take a prompt like, research a video essay about AI and the future of work, write questions and answers for imagined interviewees that I could then give to actors to perform, even generate a script that I could read aloud to you. Thanks so much for watching, and yeah, thanks to ChatGPT for writing this video. If you'd like to help support me make more videos like this one, then I will leave a link to my Patreon in the description, along with all my social media, so you can find me all over the internet. And until I see you next time, bye. This video so far has been about workers, but now let's look at the consumers, the audience. Let's turn to you. I want you to sit with whatever feeling you had when you heard me say that this video hadn't been written by me, but by an AI, when I followed it up with a request for funding, when I waited until the last possible second to tell you. If your reaction was, wow, she's actually asking us to support her on Patreon for getting an AI to write this, then you're feeling a potential lack of value in entirely AI-created content without human inspiration, voice, and passion. If your action was one of betrayal, of feeling deceived, you're feeling the lack of transparency within AI, not just whether it's been used, but what data and sources have gone into creating it. If your reaction was, oh God, I couldn't tell the difference, then you're feeling that sense of unease and helplessness at the potential of this technology without regulations or oversights. And if your reaction was, wait, so was that even close to what Rowan actually thought? Then you're feeling the confusion around AI and authenticity. The truth, the actual truth, is that I wrote this entire video. I haven't used AI to research or to write any of it. The point of telling you I had was to turn the questions back on you, because ultimately, individual workers, the kind of people that I interviewed for this video, having their jobs fundamentally changed, even eliminated altogether by new technologies like AI, have limited power to push back. If those in power think that they can get away with removing workers, asking for fair pay or treatment from companies and businesses, especially if they can be replaced with an AI that might do a subpar job but won't unionize, won't need lunch breaks or pay slips or even sleep, I kind of think they'll be inclined to do it, if they can get away with it. And that's where my questions to you come in. Because if you felt cheated, uneasy, concerned about anything so far in the video, but especially about the idea that it all could have been churned out with no discernment or understanding by a machine, are you willing to let them get away with it? Are you willing to ignore the data theft, the exploited workers, the teams laid off, the hidden bias embedded in the system, just because you might be able to get a product or service slightly cheaper? What I want to leave you with in this final part of the video is two potential paths that have been suggested in regards to AI, knowing that ultimately we haven't started fully down either one yet. Dystopia. So way back in 2016, I actually made one of my first ever video essays about the future of robotics, particularly automation and how it intersected with the gendered idea of jobs. And I remember at the time reading this recently released article about a hypothetical future where machines could do any jobs humans could currently do. Or doing research for this video, I found it again. Essentially, the writer, Ryan Avent, who has since published a book called The Wealth of Humans, Work and Its Absence in the 21st Century, was interested not just in the possibility of this future, but the preparation that it required to handle it. This quote really stuck with me, reflecting on what a world without work looks like. We then have to figure out what to do not only with ourselves, but with one another. Just as a lottery check does not free the winner from the shackles of the human condition, all-purpose machine intelligence will not magically allow us all to get along. And what is especially tricky about a world without work is that we must begin building the social institutions to survive it long before the technological obsolescence of human workers actually arrives. A dystopian future involving AI, for me, is exactly this idea that we are not prepared for it. Individual companies will begin to get away with reducing human workers without a thought, or maybe just without a care, about how this ripple effect might spread. This is not a technology which is restricted to a particular field, where a certain industry is made obsolete but is replaced with equivalent work elsewhere to continue a balance of an employed population ready to spend within a capitalist economy. Work is not just a thing we do to kill time, it's how we're supposed to earn the right to shelter, water, food, freedom. If we continue to think of full-time work as this mechanism to unlock survival, what happens when the work isn't there? Already we're seeing what anthropologist Mary L. Gray and computational social scientist Sid Suri are calling ghost work pop up to fulfill piecemeal and undesirable jobs left over by new technology. On her website, Gray explains, they perform high-tech piecework, flagging X-rated content, proofreading, designing engine parts, and much more. An estimated 8% of Americans have worked at least once in this ghost economy, and that number is growing. They usually earn less than legal minimums for traditional work, they have no health benefits, and they can be fired at any time for any reason, or none. There are no labour laws to govern this kind of work, and these latter-day assembly lines draw in, and all too often overwork and underpay, a surprisingly diverse range of workers: harried young mothers, professionals forced into early retirement, recent grads who can't get a toehold on the traditional employment ladder, and minorities shut out of the jobs they want. An interesting number of articles, sources, and writing done around AI and the future of work come from those speaking with senior leadership across industries on economic websites and forums. Some of the quotes, to me, are wildly revealing. In the Global Policy Journal, for example, I found this quote: CEOs across many sectors describe one painful current quandary. They've said to me, in effect, I have to lay off hundreds of people because their jobs have disappeared and I do not need their skills. And I have hundreds of job openings I can't fill because I can't find people with the right training and skills. This mismatch is bad for everyone. Lives are derailed, families and communities damaged, business opportunities lost. Like, just this idea of lives, families, and communities being placed at the same level of importance as business opportunities being lost feels very telling to me. The thing about dystopia as a fictional genre is that often it isn't so much an imagined future as a retold present. And indeed, we can see this within ghost work in the US, but also the work being carried out by underpaid and exploited workers in developing nations, reportedly paid as little as $1.46 an hour after tax by tech giants. As we increasingly see this attitude that humans can be replaced by machines, I think it's not unfair to say that we risk humans being treated like machines on an even greater level than they already are too. In an article arguing that supporting transnational worker organising should be at the centre of the fight for ethical AI, Adrienne Williams, Milagros Marcelli, and Timnit Gebru write, content moderators, for example, are responsible for finding and flagging content deemed inappropriate for a given platform. In spite of the crucial role that content moderators play in both keeping online communities safe and training AI systems, they are often paid miserable wages while working for tech giants and forced to perform traumatic tasks while being closely surveilled. These people are required in their jobs to watch videos of murders, sexual assaults, child abuse, and more, to either manually review the content or help train automated systems to do so, seemingly with little to no protections for their emotional and mental health, with the expectations that they function ultimately like emotionless and unaffected machines. We're beginning to see some public backlash and support for workers on social media, but it remains to be seen if it will be enough. Publisher Tor was found to have used AI-generated images on the cover of a new popular book, but claimed it was too late in the process to change it now. And Bloomsbury also claimed it had no knowledge of the AI origins of one of the covers of its titles earlier this year either. It might be plausible during this first foray into AI-created design and art, but in the coming months and years, we'll inevitably see whether consumer disapproval on an ad hoc level is enough to dissuade them entirely. In my interview with Gabe, I asked what he saw as the worst case scenario, and this is what he told me.
Worst case scenario is the bosses go, you know what? If we can get 90% of the output for 10% of the cost, we don't need you anymore. Like it was always, oh, well, all of this new tech is going to make us work less. And that somehow hasn't happened yet. And I'm not really confident that AI will lead us there. Just because AI is going to come out of our society, and our society is one that amplifies inequalities rather than smooths them out.
For a lot of people, the dystopian element is the idea of machines taking our jobs, but I would argue that maybe the true dystopia is the threat of that leading to higher levels of exploitation and desperation as we are forced to keep working. If jobs are still seen as a necessity going forwards, then workers are potentially competing with machines for these jobs as well as each other. How little will people be willing to be paid? What workplace mistreatment will they be willing to endure? We've seen how the digital age promising efficiency and productivity with the introduction of the email, the internet, smartphones and laptops hasn't freed us from the pressures of work, but often amplifies them as work begins to seep into our non-work hours with the expectation of being on call in the evening and on weekends, or having customer support for even small businesses 24/7. This breakdown of labour barriers has even led to proposals for right to disconnect policies or laws that have been taken up in various countries around the world, including France and Italy. Workers, if we follow the model of the 21st century so far, will continue to work as much, perhaps even more than before. The only ones the machines will truly liberate are the rich, whose relationship with these technologies that save money and boost profits with their work is painfully similar to their relationship with human workers themselves. Utopia.
Best case scenario is that this becomes a support for people, where actually creative people use this to start off projects, to get the basic framework down that they can then build on and create new and interesting things.
I thought it was only fair to ask Gabe about the best case scenario too, but is this really the best we can hope for? If we're letting the worst case be a hellscape nightmare, what might we imagine if we allow ourselves to think of revolutionary positives? At the moment, I think we're being sold the aesthetic veneer of a utopia. Save more time, be more productive, get AI to write this email for you. But that time in our current system that you save inevitably gets refilled with more labour. If it saves time and that time is given back to you and yours to do with what you will, that feels like a fair deal for workers. But that's not how it works, because you're selling hours of your time on Earth, not the product of those hours. After all, with most jobs, from office work to retail, if it takes you less time, you don't get to leave early. In his famous 1930s essay, Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, John Maynard Keynes predicted the kind of technological unemployment that I spoke about earlier, which he defined as unemployment due to our discovery of means of economizing the use of labor, outrunning the pace at which we can find new uses for labour. But rather than see this as an issue, he envisioned a future where his grandchildren existed in a world where we shall endeavour to spread the bread thin on the butter, to make what work there is still to be done as widely shared as possible, 3-hour shifts or a 15-hour week. This utopian dream was quickly scuppered by the decision to put profit over people, rather than creating an opportunity for revolutionising what it is to earn money and what it can pay for. And to many people today, this might seem like a naive dream of someone theorising decades into the future, but there is some grounding in truth here, especially for someone born in the 1880s. The Industrial Revolutions. So we're now in the fourth industrial revolution. The first was steam and water mechanised power in the late 1700s. The second was electricity and mass production in the late 1800s. And the third was electronics and IT from the 1950s to just a few years ago. The second industrial revolution particularly gave way to the rise of workers' rights in the West. It wasn't that, the industrial revolution happened and workers' rights went alongside of it naturally. The new technology itself went hand in hand with exploitation. Just think of any Dickensian tableau, full of impoverished workers and child labourers working hellish hours facilitated by gas and electric lights and machines. It was common for working hours to be between 14 and 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, with infants put to work as soon as they were able. Initial demands for improved working conditions and representation for workers were often met with resistance, from violent events like the Peterloo Massacre to attempts to divide and conquer the working class through concessions given only to the upper layers of labourers. In the years before World War I, the UK was home to mounting worker unrest, with hundreds of thousands involved in strikes opposed by force. The number of workers involved in disputes in the UK rose from 93,000 in 1909 to 1,400,000 in 1912. What we consider to be normal working conditions now, anti-child labour laws, the 5-day work week, maximum work hours, mandated breaks, health and safety policies and more, are working conditions fought for during and due to the previous industrial revolutions. I think many people thought that the third industrial revolution would do the same, but the revolutionary changes from the 19th and 20th centuries seem to have stalled, and so we're at this fourth industrial revolution, and as we saw from my interview with the teacher, It's not just adults, but kids who are feeling hopeless about the situation they find themselves in. And on top of that, we have these interviews and articles being written by those in economic power, saying these ahistorical things to justify keeping the status quo. Klaus Schwab, the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, wrote, "Like the revolutions that preceded it, the Fourth Industrial Revolution has the potential to raise global income levels and improve the quality of life for populations around the world." As if the Industrial Revolution itself was what improved workers' lives and not them tirelessly fighting for their own rights. And so I think this feels like a moment when we should be asking, what do we want work to look like? How do we make these technologies work for people, young and old, rather than saying we just have to learn to cope with them? What does it look like for work to feel fair, meaningful? How do we create work that feels like it makes sense? Work that people are passionate about, that young people can see a future in? Do we need to work at all? Having these discussions is easier said than done, but honestly, it kind of feels like it has to happen. Because if you've got to a point where even kids are looking at their future and saying, fuck this, there's nothing to try for, we have a bigger problem than whether AI can draw hands or not. This doesn't feel impossible to me. In fact, this new technology seems so well suited when used the right way. If we abandon the current factory-inspired structure of the education system, then the fact that AI can write current homework assignments for students isn't as much of an issue. Instead, we might ask, what does it look like to create an education system that isn't just funneling children into the workforce as its underlying goal? What if we put more emphasis on respecting and cultivating that independent thought and analysis over rote learning? How could this technology personalize the education experience? How could it support our overworked teaching staff? With the technology developing so fast, instead of doubling down on education as a set portion of your life where you learn from 20-year-old textbooks, what if it was a lifelong right? Not so-called continuous uptraining that suggests time to acquire fresh skills as part of an employee's duty as a worker through their life, but access to knowledge that isn't put in place for the sake of profit or productivity. Potentially the most obvious suggestion for this future where work itself is uncertain, at least in its current guise as a necessity for survival, is universal basic income. This idea has been a source of commentary in recent years, but it is far from new. It actually gained a wide leap in popular awareness during the first Industrial Revolution. Essentially, it proposes a system where universal unconditional payments are given by the state to people to provide them with just enough money to live on. Unlike many traditional ideas of social welfare, this wouldn't be means tested or require the recipient to work or be looking for work to obtain it, and it would indeed actually be enough to cover what you need to survive. UBI hasn't been introduced across an entire country yet, but remember, we're allowing ourselves to dream in this section of the video. The theory behind this idea is that providing people with the money they need to obtain things like shelter, food, water, heating, and electricity, just because we agree that those are things that human beings need and deserve, will give them a huge amount of freedom to pursue their talents, to find work that satisfies them, to take time off to look after family, not be weighed down by the mental stresses of survival. Something that feels like it should be available to all of us living in a world that has so much wealth and technology in it. Rather than scramble to find jobs for those left unemployed by potential industry overhauls as new technology competes with human workers for jobs, why not imagine something better? Like I already pointed out earlier in the video, this is far from the first time a monumental technological change has been upon us. In the past, we've managed to use such a period in history to push for radical, unthinkable changes to our lives, jobs, and rights. AI can be used for good specifically when used to improve workers' lives and experiences, not to replace them. In almost every industry, from fashion to food, we're used to putting ethical questions to the back of our minds. The £5 shirt or the out-of-season produce is there ready for us to consume. We don't have to think about the implications of that. In this utopian path we're peering down, could this fundamental shift in white and blue collar Western jobs also allow for a revaluing of workers the world over? And so I ask you, finally, to think about this last question. What could we push for now that would create a world of possibility and potential for all if we decided that the goal of technology is to make life easier, more fulfilling, and happier in service of all of humanity? And would you be willing to join that push? Thank you for watching. This is actually the end of the video now, and I would genuinely love to know what you thought of the topic in general, because it's a huge topic, but also this particular video and the weird structure stuff I was doing with it, something a little bit experimental. Let me know what you thought. Also, if you're interested in the longer cuts of the interviews from this video, including a bonus one, which I couldn't really figure out how to fit into the video, with an amazing dominatrix who also knows a bunch about AI, then I will be putting them up on my Patreon as well. And as usual, until I see you next time, bye.